In recent weeks, the Washington Post came out with a smear campaign article about dietitian influencers. Dietitians are funded by Big Soda. Dietitians are paid to shape your eating habits for the worst. And my personal favorite, dietitians present themselves as experts so they can hawk false information about artificial sweeteners and other foods. These are all some of the claims made by this article. So today we're going to talk about this post because, frankly, as a dietitian myself, I am not okay with the Washington Post going around and smearing our name for no particular reason. I'm excited to have a candid conversation with you about what these claims are, where some of the claims may have come from, and is there any truth to the claims made in the Washington Post article about dietitians and dietitian influencers, and also some of my personal thoughts as a registered dietitian myself. Without further ado, let's get into it. All right, so the post on Instagram says in big print, the food industry pays, quote, influencer dietitians to shape your eating habits. As the World Health Organization raised questions this summer about the risks of artificial sweeteners, a new hashtag began spreading around social media from health professionals called hashtag safety of aspartame. Dietitians like Steph Grasso, who has 2.2 million followers on TikTok, told her followers that essentially the World Health Organization's warnings were, quote, clickbait and based on low quality science. Another dietitian reassured her Instagram followers not to follow fear-mongering headlines. So far, this doesn't sound that bad to me. It sounds as if these dietitians were doing their due diligence in protecting their followers from following fear-mongering things online, which is 100% what happens in about 80 to 90% of the nutrition content that I see that's by non-dietitians and non-health coaches. And sometimes, of course, a select few use those tactics too, but I'd say more often than not, they try to stray away from that, at least the people I know.
These dietitians presented themselves as experts and tried to discredit the WHO findings.
First of all, I have a huge problem with them saying that dietitians presented themselves as experts. Since when is a dietitian with a master's degree who does 1,200 hours of an internship related to clinical nutrition and community nutrition not an expert? Like, excuse me, rude.
Red flag, their recommendation is based on evidence of low certainty, and it's considered conditional. But they love a good clickbait.
The FDA has agreed with the WHO's conclusion that aspartame is safe.
I pride myself on giving you accurate, science-backed information.
What these dietitians did not make clear was that their videos were paid for by American Beverage, which is a lobbying group for beverage companies, including Coca-Cola and PepsiCo.
I just want to add in here too, Coca-Cola and Pepsi are not the only beverages that are within this umbrella. There's other things like vitamin water, low and no calorie drinks too, and they failed to add that part in there, but they wanted to have a clickbait title and headline and video so they could make dietitians look like we're just over here promoting soda. The next thing it says is, in all, at least 35 posts from dozens of health professionals were a part of a coordinated campaign by American Beverage. The trade group paid an undisclosed amount to 10 dietitians as well as a physician and fitness influencer to use social media to help blunt the WHO's claims. It sounds like dietitians are not the only ones in here, but for some reason they wanted to call out dietitians as a whole versus the other fitness influencer and physician, which I find interesting, but okay.
Even when creators included a paid partnership label or put hashtag ad in the caption, it wasn't immediately obvious to viewers who sponsored the videos.
People would post comments like, who's paying for this video? Is this created by the FDA, by the WHO? Is this the soda industry? People had all sorts of questions. And that's a problem because the Federal Trade Commission, which is a federal agency, says that influencers need to post clear and conspicuous disclosures in their ads and in their videos.
Okay, so he is very much correct on that. Whoever was doing the postings should have been very clear that A, it was an ad / it was sponsored or paid for by a company that is not the influencer themselves, and B, it should be clear who is the one that is funding this. So that in and of itself is not a great thing. My first gut reaction is to assume good intention, that they didn't mean anything malicious by this, but sometimes I have found working with brands that they want to kind of hide that they are sponsoring the video so it looks less biased and it looks like it's just coming from the heart, which is misleading to the public, and unfortunately it is illegal, so you can't really do that. Next, it says the strategy of enlisting dietitians on social media has allowed the industry to extend its vast reach and promote often questionable nutrition advice to new generations of teens and Gen Z eaters and millennial parents accustomed to finding news and health advice on social media. Wow. So I found this really interesting because it almost acts as if we are not looking in the best interest of new generations of teenagers, and they kind of use the teenagers and the young folks and the millennial parents, which I find is funny because I'm officially now a millennial parent, but it doesn't feel like I'm old enough to do that. But you know, I'm an elder emo and an elder millennial over here. But they kind of use this tactic of, hey, the children, think of the children.
Oh no! Oh no! Grab the children! Save the children!
To make dietitians look bad and to make us look like we don't have the younger generation's best interest in mind, as if we aren't thinking of more than just food here. I have some thoughts on that, but first I want to read a couple comments because I thought some people in the comments already made some really valid points that I wanted to point out. First comment says, this article is harmful in many ways. While I agree that it is good to be open about who is sponsoring the posts, the article neglects to talk about how food neutrality and intuitive eating can be linked to better health and wellness, which is why these creators are using their voice. Eating disorders are the deadliest mental health diagnosis, and many of these creators are helping to destigmatize foods and call out disordered eating and restriction guided as health. This is a perfect example of the first thing that came to my mind when they said, oh, these dietitians are presenting themselves as experts and guiding folks to eat aspartame and these foods that are known to be cancerous when they know clear and well that they're bad for you. Yes, highly processed foods and even artificial sweeteners may have some cons to them, but I think first and foremost, the most important thing to healthy eating to me is that we have a very balanced view of what that means. Because if we're eating perfectly healthy and our mind is not healthy, like the commenter said, eating disorders are the most deadly mental health disorder or disease out there. It kills more people than any other form of mental health disorder. So to me, that is protecting the younger generation, is destigmatizing having the occasional diet soda, destigmatizing having the occasional snack. It's not a bad thing, and it's not going to ruin your health if you have these things in moderation. And I know some people have a problem with the word moderation. Really, honestly, as a dietitian, I have a very balanced view. I used to be kind of course, in the diet mentality at a young age before becoming a dietitian. And then I also got really into intuitive eating, but I realized there are some extreme sides and views on intuitive eating too. I'm kind of more somewhere in the middle. I don't think it's helpful to obsess over word usages like, oh, everything in moderation, that's diet culture too. I think it's okay to acknowledge that ultra processed foods maybe aren't the greatest thing in high quantities, but is also okay on the same token to say, hey, it's not a bad thing to have a piece of cake or a pizza or something we might traditionally see as not the most nutrient dense things. I'm very balanced in my viewpoint. You let me know in the comments section below how you feel. I don't know. I feel like there's so much one-sidedness on the internet nowadays, and I used to be afraid of sharing my viewpoints on that and being somewhere in the middle because I feared being hated from both sides. But honestly, I'm kind of tired of it at this point, so I'm just gonna speak my mind. So you let me know where you fall in this spectrum, because I feel like more of us need to talk about nuanced viewpoints on nutrition, because The social media algorithm inherently does not like to show that quite as often to us, and that's just the cold hard truth about the algorithm. The next comment says, and what about all the dietitians who weren't paid and said the exact same things on their social media? Maybe, just maybe, these dietitians examined the offer and agreed that it aligned with their own knowledge and review of the data. Such a fantastic point. Just because you take a sponsorship does not mean you're a bad person, and it does not mean that your viewpoints are false. I think that's such a weird thing that we need to get over on social media, because here's the thing. If you want to be a social media influencer or you want to make money on an online business, making videos like this or videos on Instagram or TikTok, you kind of have to eventually take sponsorships to fund your projects and to fund your ability to work and quit your job and go full-time on your business. Unless, of course, you make money doing other things, like potentially, like I have an online course, I have meal plans and stuff like that. But sometimes those things aren't what's actually making your business money in the beginning. And when you make free educational content online, brands that you love will eventually want to sponsor you when you grow, because they see you as someone who can connect with a community that will align with their brand. So if I'm talking about Perfect Bars all the time and then Perfect Bar reaches out to me and says, hey, do you want to do a sponsored video? We love your content. That doesn't mean that I don't like Perfect Bars and I'm just being fake. That just means that it aligns with what I already was talking about. I hope that makes sense. It seems odd that so many didn't get compensated and also posted the same thing. Almost like maybe they're sharing facts. Love the sass. Next one says, wow, Washington Post. This is a new low. Platforming a journalist who has a history of making false claims and fear-mongering about food, who is attacking people who are actually qualified to speak on this topic, and gasp, maybe get compensated for their time and expertise, yet crickets about the millions of influencers and celebrities hawking snake oil and making billions off of things that are completely false. Oh, I couldn't agree more with this comment. There is such a problem on the internet of nutrition information that is just completely falsified. I'm gonna call out the Carnivore MD because he does this all the time. He will say something like vegetables are bad for you, oatmeal is bad for you, and he will cite an article from PubMed or some other website that is a scientific article that supposedly aligns with what he said. And the headline will be something similar to what he's talking about, but then when you actually read the article itself and the results of the article, it does not at all align with what he claims that it says. But he is relying on the fact that you either don't know how to interpret it or that you don't have time to look into it and see if he's claiming false things about the article and using it to his advantage to scare tactic you into listening to his videos and selling whatever stuff that he has to sell. That was the second thing that came to mind when I saw this article is, wow, I'm so mad that we are getting called out as dietitians for having sponsorships, and then someone like the Carnivore MD is doing the exact same thing and actually providing false information and misleading and dangerous information and scaring people into having disordered eating because they fear having basically any food out there. He's not getting called out, but we are. Story of a dietitian's life. We will say it again for free. There is zero evidence on aspartame that it is harmful for human consumption, but it seems like you want to contribute to the erosion of science literacy of our society, huh? So that is a good point, and one that we have not gotten to yet. This video isn't necessarily for me to go really in depth on aspartame, but of course we can talk about it further if you have interest in it. But Lane Norton has a YouTube channel and he does a really great job of explaining what the actual literature says. I might insert a clip of his in here just for a few seconds for him to explain it, because I think he does so much better of a job at explaining literature than I ever could. Essentially, they did an epidemiology study, say that 3 times fast, and they look for correlations between disease and certain things. And there was a correlation between people who consume a large amount of aspartame and obesity, and if I'm not mistaken, cancer and early mortality. But the thing with this is that correlation does not equal causation, and sometimes, as Elaine Norton explains really well, there can be a reverse correlation. So someone with obesity may have a more likelihood to drink more artificial sweeteners, and the obesity may be causing the early mortality or the cancer, or other factors may be involved in the fact that someone who has a lot of aspartame eventually gets cancer more often than someone who doesn't. And so that is why dietitians were saying, hey, this is a fear-mongering title, because the WHO themselves wasn't even saying that this causes that. They were simply saying that there's a correlation, and that is how, in a gist, scientific literature can be very easily skewed for people who want to fearmonger. All right, here's one that is anti-dietitian. So I'm sharing both. When you pass yourself off as an oncology dietitian and get paid by the company that causes cancer. Again, it's not necessarily that aspartame or one thing maybe causes cancer, but we can find correlations in an epidemiology study around what might be correlated, but we can't say for sure if it causes it in that type of study at least. It's really hard to make direct correlations sometimes, but there are other studies that are more able to make those connections. The next one I love, it says, everyone pays to have influencers tell us what to buy. It's amazing how people listen to influencers who have no education, make false claims, depend on fear-mongering, and don't provide any evidence, yet automatically dismiss nutritionists who follow the science because they're paid for their knowledge and expertise. I'm so glad that some of the people in the comment section were actually defending dietitians. It is so incredibly frustrating to be the last people that some people go to for nutrition advice. You don't go to your mechanic to get nutrition advice, you go to them for car advice. And you don't go to your doctor to get advice on how to fix your car. Everyone has a lane and everyone has an expertise. So I wish dietitians were more utilized in that regard. But I have a theory that because everyone eats, everyone thinks that they are an expert in nutrition, and just because they eat every day and know the basics of healthy eating or have maybe lost weight, that they know all the things that dietitians know, and that's not necessarily true. Like we said about the eating disorders thing, a lot of times people who use their own experience alone as a way to sell information and say, hey, I know what I'm talking about, don't have the knowledge of counseling skills and knowledge behind eating disorders and how to navigate working in the field of nutrition on people who may have disordered eating habits. They don't take any of that into account, and I think that's where it comes from. Nutritionist influencers, mostly females who want to make money via a paid partnership, can't be trusted based on the fact that they're getting paid. What about the reporter who got paid for this article? Were they paid? Great point. I love the critical thinking going on in this comment section. It's amazing how women are vilified for accepting compensation for their knowledge in labor. Yeah, I noticed that the creator of the article is a male who has their own book on nutrition information as a non-professional in the nutrition field. They don't have any background in nutrition, but somehow they are selling a book on nutrition. Riddle me that. I don't want to make any claims like it's because we're female, but I do think sometimes I will say our profession gets pushed around a lot more easily because we are a majority female. I think it's 96 or 94% female in the field, and that is a problem in and of itself, but it shouldn't be just because we're women that happens. But unfortunately, I think we're taught to not be rude, to not push back, to kind of bow down to what we're told, and to do anything different would be unladylike or whatever, like we're in the 1800s. Hopefully that changes in the future, because there's a lot of reasons why dietitians need to stand up and stick up for themselves more often, I feel. So do I think dietitians shape your eating habits? I mean, yes, in a way, I think we do. And I don't think that that should be said in a negative fashion because we are the nutrition experts and we have that background in nutrition science and we have our clients, patients, audiences' best interest in mind, knowing the knowledge that we know about disordered eating, how your mental health plays into things and your relationship with food, and also, you know, the factual literature behind what is good for your body and what is not. We are here to make sure that nutrition is not just fear-mongering based and to make sure that you are not restricting unnecessarily so. I think that the biggest piece that this article is missing is that nutrition not only needs to be good and good for you, it needs to be sustainable and something that you can do long term. Otherwise, there's really no point in understanding and interpreting all this literature and data if we're not able to factually apply it and actually, you know, do the things that we know to be true, or do the things that the scientific data says to do. All dietitians and all influencers, no matter what you are, if you're a therapist, if you're a doctor, if you're an esthetician, if you are a dermatologist, you should all be disclosing whether or not you are sponsored in a video and who is sponsoring it. I don't care what kind of video you're doing or what the brand says, that is the law. So everyone should be following that. That's not just a dietitian thing, that's an everyone thing. Dietitians are not trying to make you sick by telling you that you can have aspartame. We are trying to make sure that, again, you are not restricting unnecessarily. And we are also acknowledging that, hey, maybe there are some pros and some cons to foods and drinks that are less than nutritionally wholesome for you, and that if you have them a couple times throughout the week, sprinkled in with good nutrition, having a balanced plate most of the time, then you're not going to keel over and die. In fact, you are probably going to be a healthier person because you have a balance versus being someone who is super rigid with their diet. Speaking from experience, I was the most unhealthy that I've ever been when I was perfect with my eating. So keep in mind that it's not just your physical, tangible diet, it's also your relationship with food. Also, I just want to point out in the research that guilt, shame, and fear-mongering are actually a really poor way to promote behavior change. And this is something that the dietitians who present themselves as experts learn in our expert college education. Think of if your mom sits next to you at the dinner table and says, "Are you sure that you want to have that for dinner?" That's probably going to guilt or shame you into not having what you're having, or at least having a smaller portion in front of them than you might normally. But long term, what's going to guide your true, long-lasting, sustainable behavior is a desire within. And some of you might use the argument, well, what about cigarettes and those weird 90s and early 2000s ads that promoted us not to have cigarettes? Those were fear-mongering based, and those were kind of shown to work. At least it was shown that cigarette rates have gone down over the years. Isn't that an example of guilt and shame working? Another thing to keep in mind is that food is different than cigarettes, drugs, alcohol, things like that, because food is something that we have to have for the rest of our lives, not something that we can cut out cold turkey. All in all, I think that with this article, Washington Post was being extremely biased, and they were not factoring in nuance with nutrition, nor were they consulting with a nutrition expert on the things that they were saying. I want to know your thoughts on the article in the comment section below. Do you think nutritionists and dietitians should be commenting on aspartame in this manner? Do you think that there's a better way maybe to present it? Do you think they shouldn't be presenting it as safe? Or do you want to know more about the research? I'd love to hear from you and any other thoughts that you have on this article that were presented. Now, as I said earlier in the video, I want to make nutrition something that is easy and sustainable for you. And part of that is talking about various nutrition topics in the media and kind of doing some edutainment on topics like this. So I want to hear from you in the comment section below. What kind of videos do you enjoy the most? Did you enjoy this one and the format of this? And would you like to see more in the future? I I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this one to continue hanging out with me here on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.